Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take your sources, dig through them,
Not
and
true.
fill out the really surprising, insightful, and, yeah, often pretty funny bits, just for you.
That's the goal.
And today, wow, we're diving into a life story that's, well, it's almost hard to believe. We're starting with a quote that just grabs you immediately. He
Oh,
said,
this one's a classic.
they've said some crazy things about me over the years. I mean, okay, Kura bit the head off a bat. Yes. He bit the head off a dove. Yes.
Right, owning the infamous stuff.
But then he goes on, but then you hear things like, Ozzy went to the show last night, but he wouldn't perform until he'd killed 15 puppies. Now me kill 15 puppies. I love puppies. I've got 18 of the things at home.
It's such a jolt, isn't it? And what's great about that is how it immediately sets up the big tension we're looking at today.
That's it.
The huge gap, really, between the public myth, the caricature, and the actual guy, who turns out to be, surprisingly complex. It's the theme that runs through everything.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to dig up those key moments, the unexpected truths, and the pretty stark realities behind the Prince of Darkness myth, John Michael Ozzy Osbourne.
All in his own words, which is crucial.
Exactly. Brutally honest, often hilarious. We're aiming to give you a shortcut, sort of, to understanding what really shaped this rock legend.
And our main source, really our only source for this, is incredibly powerful. It's excerpts from his autobiography, I Am Ozzy.
A first-person account.
Yeah, and it's raw, unflinching, but also properly laugh out loud funny sometimes. You get this amazing access to how he thinks, how he sees things.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack this, starting right at the beginning. Aston, England. John Osbourne's childhood was, well, it wasn't easy.
Not at all. The book really paints a picture of serious family poverty. He says, my folks had 6 kids and not much dough. Simple as that.
And his dad, apparently after a few beers, made this prediction about him, which turned out to be eerily spot on.
Yeah, you're either going to do something very special or you're going to go to prison. Chilling, really.
And how quickly did that darker side of the prophecy start coming true?
Oh, incredibly fast. Shockingly fast, actually. Before he was even 18, Ozzy ends up in Winson Green prison.
Already? Wow.
Yeah. But the crime itself, it's almost funny how bad he was at it. He calls himself a thing crap burglar,
What did he actually do?
breaking and entering, stealing stuff worth 25 11s, which he turns out is maybe 300 quid now? Peanuts, really?
And he wasn't exactly Ocean's 11, was he?
Huh, not quite. He kept hitting the same clothes shop Sarah Clark's. One time he forgot his flashlight, ended up grabbing a load of babies' bibs and toddlers' underpants. Just completely inept.
Almost comical, like you
Yeah.
said. But Winson Green prison itself,
Eh.
that wasn't funny at all.
No, absolutely not. He describes it as the most violent, piss-reeking, lawless finghole he'd ever set eyes on. Just brutal.
And his dad, instead of bailing him out.
Refused to pay the fine. Kind of a tough love thing, hoping it might finally knock some sense into him.
Did that experience, as awful as it sounds, actually change him in the way his father hoped? Or did it just, fuel the fire?
Well, it was definitely a wake-up call, a brutal one. But did it completely tame him? Probably not. It's more like context. It shows you the world he came from.
Right.
And it also ties into something else he reveals about his early life, this idea that craziness runs in the family.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just him.
Not according to him. He talks about his grandmother being borderline certifiable, and Auntie Edna, who committed suicide by jumping in a canal,
God, that's dark.
and his mom's Nan, who was a bit radio rental.
Radio rental, what's that mean?
It's a British slang. He's eccentric, bit mad, off her rocker. This Nan apparently had her granddad's initials, AU for Arthur Unit, tattooed on her arm.
A tattoo back then.
Yeah. Ozzy makes this funny point, saying it looks all right when you're footloose and fancy-free, but doesn't look too hot when you're a grandma.
Huh. So this suggests that maybe the chaos wasn't just him acting out, but almost genetic, like part of his wiring.
Exactly. That's a really key insight here, I think. The book kind of hints that his later stage persona, the whole Prince of Darkness thing, wasn't just an act.
He was drawing on something deeper.
Yeah, maybe an extension of these family traits, this inherited eccentricity mixed with hardship. It challenges the idea that the madness was purely down to, drugs and fame later on.
Right, that it had roots.
Definitely. And those early petty crimes, he makes it sound like it was more about just getting by.
Survival.
Pretty much. He and this mate, Patrick Murphy, started off scrumping apples because they were literally hungry. Then it moved on to robbing parking meters, shoplifting.
He doesn't really apologize for it, does he?
No, he's quite blunt. Says, it's what made me who I am. Owns it completely.
And that story about washing cars at the football matches.
Oh, yeah. Charging fans to mine their cars at Aston Villa games, then deciding to wash one with a wire brush, took half the paint off.
Oh my God. Classic Ozzy already.
Total chaos. But it also shows that desperation, right? Trying anything to make a bit of cash.
And that ties into his struggles at school, too. The dyslexia.
Yeah, that was huge for him. He calls it a very bad stigma to have, especially back then. And he talks about really wanting a proper education.
You feel for him there, that description of trying to read.
And his mind turning the words into Chinese. Just impossible. It really puts his whole experience into perspective.
How did that difficulty with schoolwork, affect things socially for him? Was he bullied?
Oh, yeah. School sounds like it was rough all around. There's a funny story, well, funny now maybe, about the hot penny trick on the metalwork teacher, Mr. Lane.
What was that?
Heating up a penny and leaving it for the teacher to pick up. Apparently, Mr. Lane would yell, "Osbourne, you little bastard."
But there was darker stuff, too.
Definitely. He talks about older kids pulling his trousers down, the shame of it, feeling like he couldn't tell his parents.
Awful.
But he says that experience really stuck with him, made him determine that his own kids should never be afraid to come to your mom and dad with any problems.
That's actually quite touching. Turning his own pain into something positive for his kids.
Yeah, it's a powerful moment. But school also had Mr. Jones.
Oh, right. The worst bully in the whole school. What was his deal?
He'd inspect their necks for dirt with a white towel. If it came back grubby, he'd apparently scrub them like an animal at the sink.
Yeah.
Just degrading.
Yeah.
And one time, Jones made Ozzy find the biggest shoe in the class to be beaten with.
No!
Yeah. And Ozzy just snapped. He describes this blind fing rage, grabbing metal rods and throwing them right at Jones's face.
Seriously, what happened?
Jones apparently staggered back, nose bleeding, and Ozzy just ran straight out of school, home, crying. That was pretty much the end of his formal education.
Wow. What a way to leave. And what about first love? Any less traumatic?
Tragically comical, maybe? He had a crush on this girl, tried to impress her by slicking his hair back with soap.
With soap? Why?
To make it stay flat, I guess. But then it rained. By the time he got to her, his head looked like a bubble bath. Oh, her reaction. Took one look and dumped. On the spot, he was heartbroken. But again, he looks back on it later as a parent, saying he'd never let his daughter go out like that. It's that pattern, again, learning from his own, often painful, experiences.
So, school's over. He's had this brush with the law. He needs to find something else.
No.
How did entering the workforce go? Any smoother?
Not exactly. His first proper job was plumbing. Lasted about 5 minutes.
What happened?
Got fired for, wait for it, scrumping apples on his lunch break.
Seriously. Still with the apples.
Yep. Some habits die hard. Then his next job was at some industrial plant, working with a degreasing machine.
Yeah.
They used methylene chloride. And Ozzy discovered you could get a buzz off that stuff.
Oh, boy.
So daily hallucinations followed. And predictably, another firing after he passed out over the tank.
Doesn't sound like a sustainable career path.
Not really, no. It's this pattern again, isn't it? Chasing that immediate buzz, consequences be damned. Which leads us to, well, probably his most grim job.
The Slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Digbeth Slaughterhouse, his first role. Puke remover.
Seriously.
Seriously. Cutting open sheep's stomachs. He says he was throwing up like a son of a bitch the entire first day. And that went on for weeks.
I can't even imagine.
He tells this horrific story about a condemned animal's stomach bursting in his hand, just pus and blood everywhere in his face.
That's genuinely nightmares. How do you even cope with that?
It's hard to comprehend. And it didn't stop there. He actually got promoted.
To what?
Cow killer. He describes using the bolt gun, meant to stun them, but sometimes having to shoot a bull 5 or 6 times before it went down.
Jesus.
And then the section on killing pigs, using tongs and sponges for stunning. He admits it didn't always work first time.
Oh, God.
He compares it chillingly to Auschwitz in that place on a bad day. Recalls pigs being dropped into boiling water or furnaces while still conscious.
That's, how does he reflect on that now?
With deep regret, he's very clear. There's no excuse for being cruel, even if you're a bored teenage kid. He acknowledges the cruelty and the impact it had on him.
It must have left scars.
Absolutely. And interestingly, he mentions running into Tommy from Winson Green later, the guy he knew from prison. Tommy had worked with him at the Slaughterhouse, too, roping the cows.
Wow. Small world in a pretty bleak way.
It really hammers home the reality of his background, the limited options he felt he had. But even amidst all that darkness, he had this dream.
Music?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in a band, badly. He saw the Beatles as the model.
How so?
He thought John Lennon and Paul McCartney hadn't wanted to work in a factory either. He saw them as kindred spirits, working-class kids from the back streets. An escape route?
So how did he try to make it happen? Were his first attempts any more successful than his burglaries?
About the same level, probably. He tells this great story about walking around with an empty guitar case. Empty, with the Black Panthers painted on it using emulsion paint from a garden shed. And he'd walk this hush puppy dog he found in a dumpster on a leash, just trying to look the part.
And he got tattoos.
Yeah, Ozzy across his knuckles. Again, just trying to project this image, manifest this dream into reality somehow.
Pure determination in a way.
You could say that. And then came the turning point. The famous advert.
OZZY, Zig needs gig.
That's the one. Put it in a shop window. And that led him to Geezer Butler.
What was Geezer like then?
Ozzy describes him having Jesus hair and his Guy Fawkes mustache. And surprisingly, he was a trainee accountant.
An accountant, really?
Yeah, but apparently spent all his money on lime green bell-bottoms and silver platform boots. So maybe not your typical accountant.
And Bill Ward.
Yeah, Bill, too. Describes him as being off his nut in Midnight City, part of the scene.
And then Tony Iommi. This is a crucial part of the story.
Absolutely crucial. He knew Tony from school, apparently didn't like him much back then, but Tony's story is incredible.
The act?
Yeah, factory accident. Severed the tips of his fingers on his fretting hand. Doctor said he'd never play again.
But he did.
He refused to give up. Made himself little plastic tips, learned to play again from scratch. Had no feeling in those fingertips.
And that led to his unique sound.
Exactly. It forced him to play differently, use different chords, bend strings in a new way. He developed this unique style that no one has ever been able to copy.
That's just, wow. Talk about turning adversity into something powerful. What does that tell you maybe about innovation, especially in music?
It's such a powerful example, isn't it? That sometimes limitations, real physical obstacles, can force you down a path you'd never have chosen.
And that path leads to something totally new.
Precisely. He couldn't play conventionally, so he had to invent. It wasn't just adapting, it was genuine creation born from constraint. A total aha moment for their sound.
So the core group is coming together. But the band's name wasn't always Black Sabbath,
Oh,
right?
my God, no. Their first name was, wait for it, Polka Talk Blues Band.
Pocatuck, where did that come from?
Apparently, Ozzy's mom had this brand of talcum powder, and he thought it sounded funny. Something about smelly old armpits.
Okay, glad they changed that one.
Yeah, it didn't last long. They quickly became Earth. His lyrics back then, he admits, were just whatever bollocks was in my head at the time.
And their first proper gig. As Earth.
In Carlisle, he talks about being utterly terrified, stage fright so bad he calls it a bad case of the brown trousers, just absolutely petrified.
Nerves make sense. But things got a bit wild after that gig, didn't they?
It's understatement. There was this huge fight. Some massive redhead guy challenged Ozzy.
Did Ozzy fight him?
Nope. Tony Iommi stepped in and just cracked him full on in the face. Apparently pounded the guy until the bloke went down like the Titanic.
Ooh. Tony, the quiet guitarist.
Yep. Then Tony just calmly packed up his gear. Ozzy says Bill Ward, the drummer, didn't speak to him for a week after that. Kind of set the dynamic, you know. Tony was the quiet force.
Definitely a chaotic start.
Yeah. Tony basically took charge after that, got rid of some other guys. They stuck with Earth for a bit, which Bill Ward suggested was at least better than Polka Fing Tulk.
Fair point.
But then came the name change that really defined them.
Black Sabbath. Inspired by a horror movie.
Exactly. Boris Karloff film, apparently. Geezer saw it advertised across from their rehearsal space.
Yeah.
But not everyone loved the name at first.
So it didn't.
Their manager, Jim Simpson, was skeptical. So was Alvin Lee from 10 years after. They thought it sounded, well, ominous.
But the sound matched the name, right?
Oh, absolutely. Ozzy tells this amazing story about the first time they played the song Black Sabbath live.
What happened?
He says all the girls ran out of the venue screaming. Just total shock.
Wow. And the manager
Was apparently red in the face. He'd been expecting them to play covers like Mellow Yellow or California Dreamin'. Not that.
And that was it. The birth of Black Sabbath.
You could definitely argue that. That moment when the sound, the name, the reaction all clicked into place, something entirely new had arrived.
So Black Sabbath is born, the sound is terrifying audiences,
Hmm.
and then comes the album, which happened incredibly fast.
Yeah, unbelievably fast. The debut album, recorded in just 12 hours in total, can you imagine? At Regent Sound Studios?
12 hours, that's nothing.
Basically live in the studio. But what's really interesting is the reaction.
How so?
Well, the critics, they absolutely hated it. Ozzy mentions one, calling Tony Jason King with builder's arms. Apparently, Tony punched the guy later.
Serves him right. But the fans?
Fans got it immediately. The album hit number 8 in Britain, 23 in America. Huge success right out of the gate, despite the critics panning it.
What does that tell you, that immediate split between critics and fans?
I think it shows that Sabbath was tapping into something raw, something the established music press just didn't understand or appreciate at the time.
A new audience.
Exactly. A younger audience hungry for something heavier, darker. It highlights that disconnect between the official tastemakers and what was actually resonating with people.
And the whole satanic image, was that deliberate?
Mostly accidental, according to Ozzy. The inverted cross on the album cover. He says it had nothing to do with us. Record label's idea, presumably.
Ozzy himself wasn't into the occult.
He pretty much scoffed at it. There's that great line, "Look, mate, the only evil spirits I'm interested in are called whiskey, vodka, and gin."
Classic.
He even got his dad, who worked in a factory, to make them all these metal crosses to wear. Kind of ironic, given the image.
Definitely. So the image was partly manufactured, but the lifestyle on the road, that sounds pretty genuinely chaotic.
Oh, totally grueling. He talks about this residency in Hamburg playing 7 sets a day. 7.
That's insane. Where'd they even live?
In some bombed-out shithole room sharing bunk beds. Things were so tight they apparently used Tony as a honey trap.
Honey trap.
Tony!
Yeah, get groupies interested in Tony, then nick money from their handbags just so the band could eat. Desperate times.
Wow. And then America?
Yeah, the infamous Welcome to America moment at Lowe's Midtown Motor Inn. The tour manager's present was basically a queue of women knocking on their doors. He doesn't hold back on the details, does he?
Not at all. He mentions banging 3 in one night, though admits he was flagging a bit with the last one. It's all just raw, uncensored, early days stuff.
Gives you a real sense of the whirlwind they were caught in.
Definitely. But that rapid success brought its own problems, right? Growing pains.
Like that incident at their first U.S. gig, Unganos.
Right, where this guy kept shouting, "You guys ain't black!" Just this weird, jarring moment of cultural misunderstanding. They were playing blues-based music, but yeah.
And amidst all this chaos, his personal life is also happening. He gets married.
Yeah, marries Thelma, who he met at the Rum Runner nightclub back home. They have kids.
Jessica and Louis.
Right. Jessica was born January 20th, 1972. He remembers it being a cold, clear winter night with gleaming constellations. He even gave her the middle name Starshine.
That's surprisingly sweet, actually. A little bit of beauty amidst the madness.
Yeah, those moments are there, but the madness really took over when they moved into Bulrush Cottage.
Which became known as
Atrocity Cottage. And yeah, the name kind of fits the stories from that period. His behavior just completely spiraled.
What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Buying bizarre things, like a 7-foot stuffed grizzly bear, which he then shot and its head exploded.
Yeah.
A gypsy caravan, just random excess.
Okay.
Shooting mannequins he'd tied to trees in the garden, nearly blowing his own leg off in a shotgun accident.
Jeez.
And some really disturbing animal cruelty. He talks about cats overrunning the place, and instead of dealing with it humanely, well, he says, I could have found another way to get rid of those cats. It's grim.
And the chickens.
Yeah, shooting chickens that weren't laying eggs, then pouring petrol on them. He describes blood and feathers all over the thing place. It's really dark stuff, and he expresses regret for it.
How did all that unchecked behavior and the drugs and drink, how did that affect his family life, his marriage to Thelma?
Terribly, as you'd expect. The book is brutally honest about this. And alongside the descent into chaos, there's the almost farcical vicar incident.
Oh, right. Tell me about that one.
Thelma baked a cake, right? But she didn't know Ozzy had laced it with Afghan hash.
Oh, no.
And the local vicar pops around for tea, eats a slice of cake, and then Ozzy says just boom, vicar collapses.
I thought he'd killed him.
Totally. He's shouting, fuck, vicar down. They had to basically carry the comatose vicar out, drive him home, prop him up. Ozzy genuinely thought he was a goner.
What happened? Did the vicar ever find out?
Apparently not. Later on, the vicar asked Ozzy about his band name, Black Sabbath, frowning and saying it was a rather peculiar name. The irony.
Unbelievable. But amidst all this absurdity, there was real tragedy, too. His father's death.
Yeah, that hit him hard. January 20th, 1978, at 11:20 p.m.
Which was
Exactly the same date and time his daughter Jessica had been born, 6 years earlier. He says that coincidence still floors me to this day.
God, that's uncanny. How did he cope with the loss?
Not well. He describes seeing his dad in the hospital, tied to the cot, but smiling, giving a thumbs up, a speed sign. But Ozzy's way of coping was just getting completely out of his skull for the funeral.
Avoid.
Total avoidance through substance abuse. He even tells this horrifying story about unscrewing the coffin lid at the funeral home because he wanted to see his dad one last time.
Oh, God, why was that horrifying?
Because the embalmer had used so much grease paint, his dad looked, in Ozzy's words, like a Fing clown. Just a deeply upsetting, jarring image that stuck with him.
That's awful. In all this turmoil.
Yeah.
His marriage must have been crumbling.
Completely. He's incredibly hard on himself about it. Admits he was a horrendous stepdad to Thelma's son from a previous relationship.
And he regrets hitting her.
Deeply. Calls it the worst thing I ever did in my life, something he'll take to the grave. He doesn't excuse his behavior at all, just says he was an excessive Fing pig.
How bad was the drinking then?
He mentions drinking 4 bottles of Hennessy a day. 4 bottles. Plus whatever else he was taking. Just off the charts.
It sounds like a complete breakdown.
It really was. And it all led, perhaps inevitably, to him getting fired from Black Sabbath.
How did that happen?
He basically became too unreliable. He recounts missing a crucial gig in Nashville because he'd been up for 3 days straight on coke. The band had had enough.
So suddenly.
All of a sudden, I was unemployed. And unemployable. That's how he puts it. Total rock bottom.
What did he do?
He just spiraled further. Holed himself up in Le Parc Hotel in L.A., watching war films, drinking, doing drugs. Describes himself looking like Jabba the Hutt's fat older brother.
Just complete despair.
Seems like it. He reflects on how fame had ruined all their personal lives, how he felt his family slipping away because he'd spent more time with the band than his own kids. But this low point also opened the door for Sharon.
Right. Sharon steps in. This is a huge turning point.
Massive. She basically took charge, kicked him into shape, insisted he make a proper solo album.
Which became Blizzard of Oz.
Exactly. And finding Randy Rhoads, that was key. Ozzy credits him hugely. Talks about Randy's dedication, his classical training, how they wrote songs like Suicide Solution together.
It sounds like Randy was a real stabilizing force, musically at least.
Definitely. A different kind of energy. Ozzy also shares this typically Ozzy detail about the first time he and Sharon properly got together.
What was that?
After, getting in the sack, his romantic line was apparently asking if he could come back and watch your telly. Smooth.
Huh. So a new chapter begins.
Mm.
But the Ozzy chaos wasn't exactly over, was it?
Yeah.
Enter the Bat.
Yes. January 20th, 1982, Des Moines, Iowa. The infamous Bat incident.
He really thought it was fake.
Apparently so. Someone threw it on stage, picked it up, thought it was a rubber toy, and bit its head off. Then realized...
It's real. OZY, it's real.
Exactly. Pandemonium. And then came the rabies shots.
Oh, God, yeah. How many?
He describes 1 in each arse cheek, 1 in each thigh, 1 in each arm, every day for weeks. Says he had more holes in me than a lump of Fing Swiss cheese. Just agonizing.
Why do you think that specific incident, that one unplanned moment, became so huge? The thing that cemented his whole Prince of Darkness image?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think it was just so visceral, so bizarre, so Ozzy. It tapped into that existing dark image, but amplified it massively. It was shocking, kind of morbidly funny in a way, and totally unforgettable.
And it led to fans bringing even weirder stuff to gigs.
Oh, yeah. Dead cats, snakes, you name it. He called it a butcher's convention on stage some nights. The bat thing really set a precedent.
And the madness didn't stop there. The Alamo.
Oh, the Alamo incident. San Antonio, Texas. Arrested for public urination.
Oh, the details.
He was wearing Sharon's evening gown at the time because his own clothes had been hidden to stop him going out drinking, and he genuinely didn't realize the historical significance of the old wall he was relieving himself on. Just peak Ozzy absurdity.
Unbelievable. Then came the lawsuits. Suicide Solution.
Yeah.
That was serious.
Very serious. Parents sued him, claiming the song drove their son to suicide. It became this huge case about lyrics and influence.
How did they defend it?
His lawyer, Howard Weitzman, gave this brilliant defense, arguing free speech. He actually compared Ozzy's lyrics, however dark, to Shakespeare Romeo and Juliet, themes of death and despair.
Did it work?
Ultimately, yes, the judge dismissed the case, called Ozzy's lyrics totally objectionable and repulsive, which is quite something,
Huh.
but ruled that even trash can be given First Amendment protection, too. It was a really important ruling for artistic freedom in music.
Were there other lawsuits?
Yeah, from former bandmates. Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake from the Blizzard of Oz band sued over royalties. Ozzy said maintained they were hired musicians, paid for their work, though they did get publishing. It got messy and took an emotional toll. Ozzy admits he hates amping confrontations.
Which is maybe surprising given his persona.
Right. But through all this legal stuff, all the chaos, Sharon was the constant.
He is rock, really.
Absolutely. Even though their relationship itself was incredibly volatile, he talks about wild fights.
Throwing thing.
Everything. Wine bottles, gold discs, TVs, just explosive arguments. And he admits to being physically abusive, too, giving her a black eye once.
Which he regrets.
Deeply, calls it shameful. But Sharon, she wasn't just a victim. She gave as good as she got, apparently. And crucially, she stood up not just to Ozzy, but to her own father.
Don Arden, the notorious manager.
Exactly. A really tough, powerful figure in the music business. Sharon eventually bought Ozzy's contract off her own dad for $1.5 million. An incredible power move.
Wow. She really took control.
Completely. Arden even tried to sabotage their marriage by putting his companies in Sharon's name, thinking it would protect him from lawsuits if they split. But it just gave Sharon more leverage.
So she's managing him, protecting him, and then comes MTV, the Osbournes.
Yeah, the show that nobody expected to become this global phenomenon.
Was Ozzy keen?
Not at all. He says his first reaction was thinking he'd shoot myself in the balls just to get out of it. He hated the idea.
But it happened. How did he find having cameras around 24/7?
Hated it more and more, became really uncomfortable. He demanded a safe room where there were no cameras. He found a hidden spy camera in there. His reaction, what's the point of having a safe room if there's a Fing TV camera in it? Classic.
Oh, that's brilliant. But the show made him huge in a different way, right?
Bigger than ever. A mainstream celebrity. Bigger than a movie star or politician, he says, which led to some very strange encounters.
Like the White House.
Yeah, invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, gets completely blasted naturally, sees George W. Bush across the room.
And does what?
Jumps up on a table and screams, "Yee!" right at the president.
Oh my God. Security didn't tackle him.
Apparently Bush just smiled and waved. Surreal.
And meeting the Queen.
Also surreal, he met Queen Elizabeth II. She saw him standing next to Cliff Richard, another British music icon, but very different.
Polar opposites.
Right. And the Queen apparently looked at them both and quipped, "Oh, so this is what they call variety, is it?" And then cracked up laughing.
That's actually amazing.
He even met Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, who was apparently more interested in learning the chords to Iron Man than talking politics.
Just shows how far his fame reached. Crazy intersections.
Totally. But underneath all that public craziness, the private struggle continued. Health scares, addiction.
It never really went away.
Not for a long time.
Yeah.
He lists all sorts of things he was addicted to: Valium, Vicodin, chloral hydrate, Rohypnol. The list goes on.
And the health scares were real.
Oh, yeah. Torn epiglottis from screaming. Multiple STDs. At one point, they thought he had MS or Parkinson's.
Did he?
No, doctors eventually cleared him, said something like, aside from your drug addiction and your alcoholism, you're a very healthy man, which is quite a statement.
Quite an aside, yeah. And Sharon's cancer diagnosis. How did he find out about that?
In just the most awful way. Via voicemail, she'd left him a message, he was out of it somewhere, didn't pick up. Just devastating.
God, that's rough. Did he try to get sober through all this?
Many times. Rehab attempts, relapses. It was a constant battle. He's quite philosophical about it, saying, there ain't no cure for what I've got.
What does he think rehab does then?
All rehab can do is tell you what's wrong with you and then suggest ways for you to get better. It puts the onus back on the individual.
You recount some pretty extreme moments from that period, too.
Waking up on a 12-lane freeway after a blackout, no idea how he got there. Sharon stabbing him with a fork on a plane because he was passed out and unresponsive, like a dead Fing body.
Stabbed him with a fork.
Yep. And just the sheer cost of it all. He admits he lost everything multiple times due to addiction.
It really paints a picture of addiction's grip. Pervasive.
Absolutely. And then, as if he hadn't been through enough, the quad bike accident.
December 8th, 2003. That sounded really serious.
It was incredibly serious. He was riding on his estate, hit a pothole, hand slipped on the accelerator. The quad bike shot out from under me and did a backflip, landing right on top of him.
What were the injuries?
Severe. 8 broken ribs, collapsed lung, broken collarbone, cracked vertebra. He was in a coma for 8 days. It was touch and go.
Well, he pulled through.
He did. And there's this really poignant detail from his recovery. While he was still in the hospital, basically unable to move,
What happened?
he and his daughter Kelly got a Christmas #1 single in the UK with their duet version of Changes?
Changes, the old Black Sabbath song.
Yeah, recording it together and then it hitting #1 while he's fighting for his life.
Yeah.
It's incredibly emotional when you think about it.
What a life. Just relentless ups and downs. It makes you wonder how he's still here.
It's the question everyone asks, including his doctors. One famously asked him, point blank, "Why are you still alive?"
And what's Ozzy's answer?
Basically, that there's no plausible medical reason why I should still be alive. After everything he's put his body through, it defies medical explanation.
So medically, he shouldn't be here.
According to him, nope. He jokes his liver is like brand new, despite the abuse. He's got some lingering things, a mild stammer, short-term memory issues, but considering, it's remarkable.
What's life like for him now, according to the book? Quieter.
Seems so. Prefers being at home. He mentions having 17 dogs at one point.
17. Still loves puppies then.
Apparently so. And he's got this high-tech Japanese toilet that washes and blow-dries him. Finds that hilarious.
Of course he does.
But fundamentally, he credits his sense of humor with getting him through it all.
How so?
He says, "I've always been able to laugh at myself. Humor has kept me alive over all these years. Finding the absurd, even in the darkest times, seems to have been his anchor."
That makes a lot of sense, actually. It's a survival mechanism.
Totally. And what a survival story it is.
Incredible, isn't it?
Huh.
From that poor kid in Aston, scumping apples, dodging prison, working in a slaughterhouse, to becoming this global icon who somehow survived decades of unbelievable excess.
Mm.
His resilience is just
Huh.
off the charts.
He really is this walking paradox, isn't he? The Prince of Darkness who adores puppies. The guy who went through hell, caused some hell himself, but found love and laughter somehow.
Yeah, what really stands out to me from diving into his own words is how much more there is to him than the headlines, the caricature.
Definitely. You see the vulnerability, the regret, this almost childlike quality sometimes, even amidst the absolute mayhem. His story really makes you question how much we ever really know someone from their public image.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe let's leave you with a final thought. It comes from Ozzy himself, thinking about his epitaph, what he reckons will be on his headstone.
What does he think it'll be?
Simply, Ozzy Osbourne, born 1948, died whenever. He bit the head off a bat.
Perfect.
But think about that. What does that single infamous line truly capture about a life lived that fully, that wildly, that uniquely? How often do our most notorious moments end up defining us, maybe overshadowing the real complexity underneath? What depths get hidden by the headlines?
That's a great question to ponder.
Something to chew on. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.